I'm JohnBerry555, and as part of my series of MASH retro reviews, today I'll be talking about the first and second episode of the 5th season of the television show MASH. So this is the premiere, and like season 4, and like we're also seeing in season 6, the premiere was a 2-part episode. Given that, I'm talking about the episodes together, 1 and 2, so the episode is entitled Bug Out. And honestly, this is probably one of my favorite episodes of MASH. In some ways, it might also be one of the more realistic episodes because, they have to deal with rumors that are impacting their ability to operate, which I think is probably a real thing, but probably the most real thing is we have a patient that if we start operating on, we won't be able to move, and if these bug out rumors are true, that's not good. So the rumors are squashed, so they start operating, and then it turns out they're actually bugging out, and now they got to deal with the fact that they got one patient who is unable to be moved for at least 24 hours, and the enemy's coming. And that's probably one of the more realistic things in MASH. Just every now and then they do get realistic, especially later on, but think about it in this episode. The most realistic thing that you have to deal with. You're a doctor trying to do your job. You gotta save your patients, but at the same time you gotta keep them safe. And what happens when something is making that hard to do? I think that's a very realistic thing. Maybe it's not as full of drama as you would see in modern medical dramas, or even probably medical dramas back then. It's still MASH, it's still a comedy. There's some great comedic moments in this episode, but it is something very serious, and because of that, Hawkeye, Margaret, and Radar do not evacuate because they're staying with the patient until the patient can actually be moved. And of course, a lot of the humor actually comes from Frank. Frank, we're getting to near the end of his time on MASH. Season 5 and Season 6 are going to be his last season, if I remember correctly. And, well, he, like I said, his character is pretty much set in stone. He doesn't get any change, and that's part of the reason why Larry Linville left the show, because he didn't think there was any way they could develop Frank's character, and I think that's right. But Frank in this episode is, I would say, the comedic heartbeat. Him, falling into the tree that they were digging before the bug out. Making fun that apparently his end of the tree needs to be a bit lower. Him knocking the stakes out of one of the initiative personnel's hands that Colonel Potter told the soldier to keep, but Frank says get rid of them, make new ones. Not understanding that when they arrive at the location that Colonel Potter has scouted out, that Colonel Potter and BJ were trying to tell him that that building was not just occupied, but who it was occupied by working ladies. Frank was not getting that. And of course, then the additional humor of Klinger having to give away all his clothes in order for them to get that building, which they end up never actually needing because the front lines get pushed back and they return back to the old location set up. But one thing besides all those moments that I really like about this episode is just seeing the process of bugging out, them disassembling the camp and all that. That I find very interesting. Now, I don't know how realistic that is to how MASH units would have actually relocated, bugged out the MM Mobile during the Korean War. I don't know quite how realistic this is to that, but I can tell you one thing for sure. There's a scene where they're emptying out post-op, and you see outside, and you can clearly tell that nothing had been taken out from outside, because that's the sound stage. They only disassembled the outdoor set. I'm convinced that's what happened based off of that. And honestly, that makes sense. That's background imagery. That's not front stuff that you would actually adjust for the shot. You would just assume keep the door closed, but they didn't. But like I said, it's a good, fun episode. Another, I think, moment that's really good is right after they get the patient evacuated, Hawkeye, Margaret, and Radar are getting their Jeep on ready to drive out, and Hawkeye takes a moment to just reminisce about the place. Okay. But honestly, it is actually a very sincere moment because they have lived their lives for who knows how long. Remember, continuity in MASH besides character development is not a thing. And it's actually a very heartfelt moment. And then after it, it's undercut by the Jeep not starting. And that's how you do it, right? You have a sincere moment, and then something totally different undercuts it in terms of the audience, but not in terms of the scene itself. And then they hear vehicles coming in, assuming the Chinese. No, it's just the 477 returning back, with Colonel Potter on the lead on Sophie. And that's actually another thing I really like too. Kunapato, in leading the convoy of them going to the new location, coming back, is riding his horse Sophie. It just makes perfect sense. It fits his character well, and also means that one less spot on the jeeps and trucks that is taken up by him, and therefore somebody else can be it. Now everyone is riding except for Klingo, because he has to take his clothes by hand, on the cart, because Frank won't let them on a government vehicle. He also won't let Hawkeye and BJ still on, and Radar's animals, but they get help from a local Korean who operates a cab. Well, not a New York City cab, by the way, but no, a bicycle basically. But anyhow, but the point is, Klingo gets to walk. And apparently Radar's bunny rabbits end up having babies doing all this. Again, that's not mine, but I just wanted to kind of share that moment. There's also Frank somehow got his hand on a whistle. Nobody knows how he got it. Kunapato doesn't know, and it's frustrating him. Not that he doesn't know that Frank keeps on blowing it, and BJ's joke is that he got it in a box of Cracker Jacks. Eventually Kunapato confiscates it, and Frank is like, he took my whistle. I don't know why that scene is so funny. It just is. And then, of course, then the episode actually ends with how it began. Hawkeye and BJ watching them dig the new latrine. By the end, Hawkeye jokes that they have to dig it a bit deeper because it's contaminated. Because Frank fell in it. And I just love that as a joke. But honestly, a deeper latrine is actually probably better from a sanitary perspective until it contaminates the groundwater. Yeah, that's the one thing I do wonder with the latrines. They dig a hole, which is okay, but do they do any lining? Do they do anything to make sure it doesn't contaminate groundwater? Obviously, they probably never thought of that, but that is something I know, at least nowadays, is something that should be considered. And I think it's supposed to be considered according to regulations. Now, whether things are followed through or not is a totally different story. But yeah, Burghoff is one of my favorite episodes. I showed all my favorite moments, and you can let me know your favorite moments down below. There's not too much in terms of character development and all of that, but again, this episode doesn't really need to. It's supposed to be introducing us to Season 5. A common trend in the previous seasons of MASH is Season 1 generally always, not Season 1, Episode 1 generally in some form always reintroduces our characters, while the last episode in some form kind of recaps them in some unique way. And we saw that every single season. In this episode, it's the same thing. We are being reintroduced to who our characters, who they are, how they get along with each other. All that is being reintroduced to us. And I think part of that too, it's also, one thing they did is help reset Margaret's relationship with Frank. You saw this a bit in Season 4 with Margaret starting to drift away a bit more from Frank, but in Season 5 and then especially in Season 6, we'll see this picked up on a lot more and shown to us a lot more. And part of that is because Kunapato becomes a father figure for Margaret, gives her a good role model, and makes her realize that maybe Frank is not the best person to be around with, and eventually she meets Penobscot, but we're a bit away from that. But a good way they're showing that almost that father-daughter style relationship between them, the role model relationship, is that when they get back to camp, they briefly stop to chat and all that, and then Kunapato invites Margaret up on Sophie with him to ride the remaining couple maybe 100 feet into the camp, if that. But the point with that is showing that Margaret is not really with Frank like she used to be. They still allude to that, but I believe in previous episode 1s of the season, they were full-on scenes showing them being a couple, being together. Here, just a few jokes at Frank's expense. I don't think anything really involving Margaret too much. And that's because they're setting up the fact that Frank and Margaret are now drifting apart. It's setting up what that's going to be the new character continuity, the new status quo for them. And that's something MASH has always done. Not in terms of that context, but in terms of setting up our characters or reintroducing us to the characters. And that's why I think it's so neat. There's some shows out there that Season 1 of a new season, it's not special in any way. It's not reintroducing anything. It's not setting up anything new. It's just more of the same. But MASH has generally always done something with its first episodes. It's always either reintroducing or setting up characters or even showing that, hey, there's going to be slightly different things going on. MASH has, at least to this point, and if I remember going forward, same thing, always done something to show us what MASH is and reintroducing us to it, and without just doing the same old like so many other shows do. Basically, MASH's episode 1s are never going to be in episode 5. But some other shows, their episode 1 might as well just be in episode 5. But that's what I got to say. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And I hope to see you next week for Margaret's engagement. So actually, next episode is when she meets Colonel Penobscot. I guess I got my timeline wrong. Thank you for watching my latest retro review. I do hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please be sure to give this video a like. Also, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. And I hope to see you for my very next video.